Hello again, everyone, from CPAC 2019 here at National Harbor, Maryland, just across the river from Washington, D.C. We are not far from the swamp. This is where conservatives are gathering to talk about the great conservative issues of our day. Earlier today, the people who are here, attendees, heard from Vice President Mike Pence. Tomorrow they'll hear from the President of the United States. I'm Brian Wilson. I am a radio host from Nashville, Tennessee. Spent about 31 years here in Washington. I'm your host here on JWTV as we talk to some of the interesting people who saunter by here at CPAC 2019 on JWTV. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of you watching via social media platforms around the country right now. We're so glad that you're there. Our first guest here this afternoon is Jim Simpson, an investigative journalist with the Center for Security Policy. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but if I could, Jim, let me start by asking the question about what's going on in Washington. I think a lot of conservatives here are watching with a great deal of puzzlement when they see what's going on with the new members of Congress, the new Democrats that seem to be incredibly socialistic, incredibly progressive. It's a very interesting dynamic that's in play right now, and they're getting an awful lot of attention.
Well, they sure are, and I think that's part of the strategy. They throw out the absolute most extremist people that they can find, and then when they come along and propose something that's a little less extreme, it sounds reasonable by comparison.
Is that part of the is that what they're doing?
It's definitely part of the strategy. That's why people like Alexandria Occasional Cortex, I call her, are out in front. They take all the heat, and they'll take all the fall, too. The other folks that stand in the background, they're every bit as radical. If you know anything about Nancy Pelosi's past, she sided with the communist Nicaraguans, the communist Salvadoran guerrillas. I mean, she's about as radical as they come, but she keeps herself in the background. She used to be a member of Democratic Socialists of America along with Alexandria Occasional Cortex and the other, Rashida Tlaib.
Right.
And that itself is a misdirection because Democratic Socialists of America is a descendant of a communist party. It is not democratic in any sense of the word. What they do is they add those terms in to make it sound more reasonable, but they're every bit as radical as this Communist Party of the USA.
So by moving the discussion to things like the Green New Deal and some of these really unusual and very socialistic ideas, maybe what they're doing is making their other ideas seem less crazy.
Exactly.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
No, that's exactly the whole strategy. And it's the Marxist dialectic. It's the Marxist dialectic. You put out the absolute most insane, worst argument that you can, and then by comparison, and then you actually, when people go nuts over it and say, oh, well, you can't do that, it's too expensive, that's too expensive, then you say, oh, well, what about this? And this is where you really want it to be. So especially with green energy, the whole Green New Deal, the entire agenda there is to obtain huge swaths of government, of taxpayer dollars to shower on their left-wing compatriots who get involved in green energy. I mean, that's what Obama's green energy program was all about, and that's why they're just drooling over it, because we're talking about trillions of dollars being moved over to the left. That's what it's really about.
Well, you are with the Center for Security Policy. Jim Simpson, I appreciate you joining us here at the Judicial Watch booth at CPAC 2019. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as you may hear in the background, there's a little bit of rowdiness going on as we people are here to express their enthusiasm for conservatism. Sometimes you would think the protests are bad things. These are actually positive protests. But unfortunately, because they're about 50 feet from where we are, you'll be hearing a lot of noise in the days ahead. I need a little guidance. Oh, Hayden Williams, yes, you taught me about this earlier. Thank you. Joining me now here is Hayden Williams with the Leadership Institute, and you have an interesting story. And I also notice, if you don't mind me saying so, you still have a little shiner under your eye.
Yeah, just a little bit, yeah.
And if you've been watching the story that happened on the campus of UC Berkeley, you were the young conservative who was attacked and socked in the eye.
That's right.
Take me back to that moment. Tell me exactly what happened that day.
Sure.
And what has happened since.
So as a field representative for the Leadership Institute, it's my job to help conservative students across California organize their clubs and get new members, host events, and that sort of thing. So on February 19th, I was invited to UC Berkeley by some conservative students to do just that. And they wanted to set up a demonstration in protest of the hate crime hoax that was perpetrated and exposed by Jesse Smollett. And I thought that was a great idea. So we get to campus around 10 o'clock and set up a table. And we're kind of, we always like to make signs together as like a bonding exercise. So we came up with hate crime hoaxes hurt real victims. We support our president and that this is MAGA country, to show that this isn't what we stand for.
Right.
Yeah, and it was a great day until the very end. When
now, how did it go most of the day?
Yeah, so every time I've helped these kids at Berkeley set up, there's a lot of harassment, but there's also a lot of support. So surprisingly from students, but a lot of times they don't want to sign up or put their name on anything like that for obvious reasons. So. There's mixed emotions, but never has it been such a violent response as it was on this day.
And so at the very end, describe. We've seen it on social media 100 times now, but describe exactly how that all went down from your perspective.
Right. So I was with the president of the club, and we were manning the table, and we were talking to a guy who was asking us about the club. He was kind of interested in what we had to say, and as we're talking to him, I noticed this one guy comes up to behind the table right next to me and starts yelling at me. And I'm like, relax. And it was clear he wasn't there for a dialogue. So in that moment, I kind of feared for the safety of my students I was working with and myself. So I started to record, and that did not de-escalate the situation. In fact, they started to attack me, to swat my phone out of my hand and push me and punch me, flip over my table. It was just really crazy.
Now, what has happened since that moment? You got socked in the eye, and as I say, you still have a little bit of a shiner. It's been many days since that happened. What happened since then, and what has happened to the young man who perpetrated the attack?
Yeah, it happened about 10 days ago, and I'm still recovering. I'm not sure exactly who this individual is, so we don't.
Did police get involved?
Well,
what happened?
I heard from my sources over at campusreform.org that there was a felony arrest warrant issued recently, very recently, in the past 24 hours or so for his arrest. So hopefully he gets apprehended soon.
Yeah, and what would you like to see? What would be a good outcome here in your mind?
For me, I would like people that are interested in politics to look at this as a chance to really self-reflect on their beliefs and really listen to the other side more, to reach out and try to listen to an opinion that they might not disagree with, or they might disagree with or think they disagree with, and they may find they have more in common than they have different.
Yeah, so you're hoping that we do have a productive dialogue.
I hope that can be had, yes. It's my hope.
Were you surprised at the vehemence of the reaction?
Yeah, I was kind of shocked that there were some people nearby kind of egging the attacker on and encouraging him and mocking me while I'm getting punched in the face. And the reaction from some students and even faculty on social media was kind of hailing this guy as a hero, and that was just really disappointing.
Yeah. All right, so you're healing up okay?
Yeah, I'm still recovering.
No lasting damage?
Well, yeah, I don't think I have any brain damage or anything like that, but I do have some symptoms of light concussion, like ringing in the ears and persistent headaches and sensitivity to loud noise and such.
And if they come to you and ask if you want to prosecute, you want to prosecute?
Well, we're just taking it step by step. I'm leaving my options open as far as that goes, but really just the next step is getting this guy arrested.
Hayden Williams from the Leadership Institute. He was the young conservative attacked on UC Berkeley campus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Greatly appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for coming out here to share your story with us.
Thanks for getting it out.
Greatly appreciate it. You are watching Judicial Watch TV, JWTV we call it, on social media platforms. I am told that there are as many as 6 million people who are watching via social media platforms, or can watch by social media platforms. That's amazing. And we're so glad that you're there. You know the important work that Judicial Watch does. You know that they're like a dog with a bone when it comes to making sure that they get after the documents, they get the news that they need, and they continue to get documents that no one else can get. That happens because of your support. And on behalf of the folks at Judicial Watch, I want to tell you how much they appreciate that. Your support means everything. And it is really true. As someone who worked here in this town for about 31 years, Judicial Watch continually gets at the stuff that nobody else can find. It's because they are dogged in their pursuit of this information, and they continue to work every day, and they never, ever give up. Our next guest here today is Coy Griffin.
Coy Griffin.
I'm guessing you're Coy Griffin because,
yes, sir, Brian.
because you are with Cowboys for Trump.
That's correct.
Well, now,
yes,
first
sir.
of all, is that a coyote?
That's a coyote. I trapped and
now, do you call it a coyote or coyote?
Coyote.
Yeah.
Yeah. I trapped and skinned him myself.
Really? And
yes,
where
sir.
are you from?
I'm from New Mexico. I'm a county commissioner in Otero County.
Where? I don't know that part of New Mexico.
Are you familiar with Holloman Air Force Base
Yes,
or
I
White
am.
Sands? That's my home.
White Sands Air Force, that whole
Yes,
that's
sir.
southern New Mexico.
Central Southern, yes,
Yeah,
sir.
not too far from the border.
That's correct.
Border
That's
issue is
correct.
very important to
yes,
you down
sir.
that part
and
of the world?
That's a driving point of why we came out, Brian, is, you know, we sit out in New Mexico, a state that's directly affected by the border security, and we listen to our political leadership, use it as a political bargaining chip, and it's shameful. They're putting our safety and our security at risk as residents in New Mexico, and our Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, she's just using it for a political game.
All right, so you're no doubt you're aware that there is a conversation going on in Washington right now. The president made an emergency declaration, wants to build the wall. You're supportive of that, I guess.
Absolutely. That's why we came out, Brian. We started this. The Cowboys for Trump started with a horseback ride that began on February 15th. And we knew that our president was going to be under the gun on that day. We knew he was going to be faced with a difficult decision. So we wanted to come out, ride horseback about 170 miles, just to show our support for our president and for his strong stand and the leadership that he's given our country.
And so you began where?
We began in Cumberland, Maryland. We rode along the C&O Canal, if you're familiar with it, along the Potomac River. Most beautiful trip. Man, it's beautiful.
Yeah, but it's also cold this time of year.
It's cold, you know, and as that day was approaching, it seemed like every time I turned the news on, the winter weather watch and storms. But you know what, partner? The guys that I got put together, they're Cowboys, and they're tough. And whenever a Cowboy puts his mind to something and decides to do it, we screw our hat down and we get her done, and that's what we do.
It's interesting to me that you have such a passion for the policies of a president who really on a social strata level, you have really not a lot in common. He's a billionaire New York developer.
That's correct.
You're a Cowboy County Commissioner
correct.
from New Mexico.
That's correct.
What do you find attractive about this president and his policies?
You know what we did, Brian, is we built one of the guys that rides with me, Ramey Harper. He's a hat maker out of Farmington, New Mexico, and he built the president a cowboy hat. And we put the president's name inside that hat, and we're taking it to him. We weren't able to get it to him on the last trip. This summer, we're going to take it back to him, though. But on that note, you know, we know that our president isn't necessarily one of us, but he's a cowboy at heart. And if there's ever been a president in office that deserves a cowboy hat, it's Donald J. Trump.
Talk about the disconnect between the way you look at things in New Mexico, which would classify in most people's definition, it's definitely flyover country.
Oh, yeah.
And the way things are viewed here in Washington, D.C. The things that are important, it seems, in Washington, D.C., do you sometimes look at it and shake your head and say, what in the world is that all about?
Yeah, you know, I mean, New Mexico right now, unfortunately, is the most heavily federally funded state in the United States. And on another unfortunate note, recently data was gathered from different points, education, crime, poverty, and New Mexico was ranked the least desirable state in the United States to live in. And it's shocking because New Mexico has so much to offer.
Yeah.
We have the greatest climate in the United States. We have lots of public lands. We have a great culture with the Native and Hispanic cultures. We have so much to give but yet the liberal policies that are affecting New Mexico are crippling us to a point where we're rated the most least desirable state in the United States, and unfortunately our governor is keeping us on that path, and it's a shame.
It is the land of enchantment, after all.
That's right.
And if you ever need evidence of that, take a little drive from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Pagosa Springs.
Absolutely.
That is some of the most beautiful country in
where
the world.
I'm from,
It truly is.
Where I grew up in the Gila National Forest on the western side of the state of New Mexico, we're loggers and sawmillers there, and it is beautiful country, but it's unfortunate, again, that our forests are being mismanaged by the United States Forest Service, and we're suffering catastrophic fires. But I had a conversation with the president 3 days ago on the phone. I was able to bend his ear for 30 minutes. I explained to him the crisis that we have with our forests. He's got my phone number. 1 day later, I had the Department of Agriculture on the phone with the heads of the Forest Service. That's the kind of president we have in office.
That says an awful lot.
You bet
It really does. It's nice to meet you, Coy Griffin. Cowboys for Trump just got through with a 185-mile ride from Cumberland, Maryland, right to the nation's capital.
And we have an app on our Facebook page, and we have cowboysfortrump.org. Check us out.
And you have a coyote.
And I got a coyote on my shoulder.
It's good to meet you.
Thank you,
Brian. It's good luck. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you.
I think that's been my favorite interview of the day. It's not every day you get to interview someone who has a coyote wrapped around his neck. But I got to tell you, it is interesting to hear people talk about how different it is in some parts of the country, the way they view things, and then how they look at the situation in Washington, D.C. with sort of a sense of puzzlement about what happens here inside the Beltway, or as it's more commonly called these days, inside the swamp. It is now my distinct pleasure.
Speaking of the swamp,
talking to my good friend
segue.
Larry O'Connor. I have to have a moment of full disclosure here.
Yes.
Larry O'Connor and I are very good friends. Larry O'Connor and I did 4 years of talk radio at WMAL Radio here in Washington, D.C. He now is bi-coastal.
That's true.
He does a radio show both in L.A. and in Washington, D.C. every day.
That is correct.
And you do other things.
2 separate shows.
And you do other things as well.
That's true. I'm with the Washington Examiner as well, and it's good to see you.
It's good to see you, my friend.
You realize, so this is, we're YouTubing right now?
We're on all kinds of social
See, now
platforms.
this is a dangerous situation. Because I know that there's value in going viral.
Yeah.
So now I need to do something. I need to say something. I need to be audacious in some way.
Something that people will replay.
That's right. That's my plan. That's my strategy. So just look out for it.
Well, just don't embarrass me.
It's good. Well, no, see, now that's all part of the plan. Now, I got to turn my phone off. All right, go ahead.
So let's talk.
How are you?
I'm good. Tell me, the issues that are going on in this town right now are myriad.
Oh, man.
Let's start right now. We're talking about the Mueller investigation.
Yes.
Many people believe we are nearing the end of that investigation.
Yeah.
And really it's not clear at all what we're going to learn about this 2-year investigation by the special counsel.
Well, and there's also, Brian, as you know, the question as to whether we should learn anything from this investigation, because, the way the Justice Department and whether a federal prosecutor is supposed to work is they investigate a crime. In fact, I don't even know if there's a crime in this case, but they investigate. If they find that they can bring an indictment, then they do their talking in the courtroom.
Right.
And if they don't bring an indictment, then we don't know about it. We don't hear about it.
Right. So that's why Rod Rosenstein, take Rod Rosenstein with a grain of salt, I guess, but what he said the other day publicly was, we don't often talk about cases where no charges are brought.
Right, unless it's James Comey talking about Hillary Clinton.
And that seems to be the only example where that was done. But they're sending all the signals that if we get a report from Mueller and there's not a charge against the president, we're not going to have anything to say.
Yeah, and I'm torn about that because I want transparency, obviously, and I think this is such a high-profile thing that the American people deserve to know quite a bit about what's been going on and all the money that's been spent. However, at the same time, to be fair, why should we treat the President of the United States or anybody in his campaign different than any other American citizen? Federal prosecutors or local DAs, they don't have press conference and issue and publicize a report that says, we investigated this individual, we didn't find a crime, but here's all the things we did find. I mean, that's insidious. That's against our rights. So I'm torn about it. I mean, I want to know, but at the same time, I really don't have the right to know.
The other thing that everybody's watching right now is the battle over immigration. The president has declared an emergency.
Yeah.
Democrats want to strip him of it. It seems a fair number of Republicans are willing to go along with the Democrats to make that happen.
A fair number, but I don't think enough to veto his, or override his veto.
So if the president vetoes, it would take a large number to do it, and that probably won't happen.
That's right.
Still, Republicans will be handing their president something of an embarrassment if they side with Democrats in this matter.
Yeah, and the Democrats will be able to say, you know, a bipartisan effort in the Congress said this is a wrong thing to do. Fine. I mean, I don't think the president cares. And you know what? I don't think I care. I mean, we watch that campaign together every day, right? And we know for a fact that one of the major things, if not the major thing, that distinguished Donald Trump from the other candidates in the Republican primary, and certainly from the Democrats and Hillary Clinton, was to get serious about protecting the border and building a wall. And so, I mean, this may go against what Republicans in this town are supposed to think, but if he builds that wall and it means that he doesn't win re-election because of bad politics, you know what? I'm okay with that. We didn't elect Donald Trump for 4 years so he could win re-election. We elected him for 4 years so he could do the things in those 4 years he's supposed to do.
Yep. What have you thought so far about your CPAC experience? I mean, you never know who you're going to run into.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You heard the chanting of "Gay for Trump, Gay for Trump."
Oh, is that what that was?
That was Gay for Trump.
I couldn't figure it out.
There was a whole lot of people who were apparently gay for Trump.
Okay.
Not sure what that looks like.
But go ahead.
I mean, I could imagine what that would look like.
You're not going to do that.
Right. This could have been the moment.
It could have been, but I'm going to stop you. So
speaking of that,
but tell me about who you've seen that has been surprising to you.
A surprise to me. Well, it's like kind of all the usual players, isn't it? I mean, in a way, we've had mostly the same kind of people. I haven't been surprised. Oh, the pillow guy.
Oh yeah,
Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, is everywhere.
He is everywhere.
I had one of the guys I was on, on our tech team there for the show. I said, "Oh, we want Mike Lindell, the pillow guy," and he said, "Who's Mike Lindell?" And I said, "It's the pillow guy." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "You don't watch cable news, do you?" And he said, "No, I do not."
I have a theory that Mike Lindell and Larry Sabato are really the same person.
Oh, that's good. The same mustache, sir.
They have never been seen together.
That's great. Oh, I just remembered. Gary Sinise. Gary Sinise
is here. Was he here? I didn't see him.
I think he's scheduled to be here today, and he is a fantastic individual.
What a wonderful human being,
right? Yeah, he is. And I was very happy to see that he was going to be here, and that's always fun.
Yeah,
I think.
But it is an important gathering of conservatives. Important things happen here. I mean, we have the Gays for Trump, but we also have the vice president and the president speaking, key leaders, and it is the place where conservative thought coalesces for a few days to exchange ideas.
Yes. They should hire you, Brian. That was very well put.
Thank you.
Have you noticed that it's kind of a younger group this year?
It is.
I mean, it seemed that's kind of exciting. I think that the work that Charlie Kirk and Turning Points USA and a lot of those other groups trying to encourage people on campus to sort of look at and get excited about conservative ideas, that's kind of heartening to me.
One of the things that I've always liked about it is that young people come here in big numbers, really big numbers, and they're very energized and they're very excited. We just had the young man on who was actually attacked and given the black eye in Berkeley.
Up at Berkeley, yeah.
And you know, he is among those who are out there, really going out there and enthusiastically talking about the great conservative ideas of our time.
And what does he get for it? A black eye. He gets punched in the face at your University of California.
All right, well, we got through that without harm or consequence.
Well, I have one more thing I wanted to say.
Okay.
No, I better not.
Good to see you, my
friend. Good to see you.
This guy's trouble. He's nothing but trouble. Larry O'Connor, ladies and gentlemen.
Days for Trump going viral.
That's right. We are here. He distracts me. I don't know what to tell you. We are here at CPAC 2019, where we are in the midst of listening to some of the conservative ideas. We have a booth here at Judicial Watch, and people saunter by. And there's this little magical camera trick that happens is they come over here and they focus on me for just a moment. And then, as if by magic, when they widen back out, there is a new person sitting in the chair. How about that? It's like magic, ladies and gentlemen. You are Bill Marshall, a Judicial Watch investigator.
I am.
How are you, first of all?
Good to meet you.
It's good to meet you. I like so much what you guys do at Judicial Watch. And you really are, and I've used this term before, it's an old Southern term. You guys are like a dog with a bone. Mm-hmm. When you get on to something, you don't let go. Tell me how you go about the process of deciding what things you want to know about, and then how you follow up on those notional ideas of, I'd like to know more about this, how do we get at it?
Right. Well, we largely, like everyone else, follow the news. The reporting that you've always done in your career, the reporting that everyone else is doing, and we're looking for angles and stories where there are likely to be valuable government records, which these days is almost everywhere because the government touches virtually everything in our lives. And of course, well, as we all know, the government is meticulous at record keeping. And records, obviously, documents offer an invaluable insight into the operations of government, and because nothing gets done without some paperwork. And they have been, the Freedom of Information Act, which is what we rely on, is sort of a prosaic, arcane law that nobody really thinks about. But it's particularly in the last 10 years, I would say, particularly with the last administration, it became a vital tool to hold our own government accountable to the American people. And we, as you say, we're relentless. We have a staff of terrific attorneys who have spent literally decades doing nothing but FOIA litigation. And the investigators, like myself, we're very autonomous in the sense that we get our own ideas as to what might make for a good investigation. We have people contact us, fans of Judicial Watch with suggestions. I have many friends in the media and various industries, think tanks and what have you, that approach me with ideas, and we sometimes collaborate with them. For example, I'm working with Family Research Council, Susan B. Anthony List, the Lozier Institute on pro-life, abortion-related issues, investigations, and there are some incredibly egregious stuff going on with respect to abortion, as you know.
Right.
That was exemplified, of course, by my governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, and so we're going after his record. Records related to his discussions about abortion and.
Well, because there's often a disconnect between what they say publicly and what the records reveal are their true positions.
Well, exactly, and there's nothing. There's no better record to reveal those true discussions and those true thoughts than, frankly, email and text messages. People put their unvarnished thoughts, as Hillary Clinton will tell you, into emails, and they become a vital commodity, if you will, in holding the American government accountable.
Shows you a lot about process.
Yes.
When something is being worked out, when a certain policy is being sought, often the discussions in Washington and elsewhere, and other companies around the world, happen on email. You don't get the big board meetings anymore. It's all collaborated on email. So there is a really good record of everything from A to Z that tell you how they got from here to there.
Right, exactly. And people forget. We all do. We all communicate primarily now via email, and we forget that when you're in the government in particular, that your thoughts as expressed via email are official government records. And not only emails, but instant messages for the people who still use that platform, text messages, and that's a whole other area that Judicial Watch is trying to pioneer, if you will, is the capturing and archiving by the government of text messages, which historically has not been done.
You talk about emails, no more important investigation and that Judicial Watch has an important role into the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private server and the emails. So tell me, were you involved in any of that, and what was the big moment in that?
Oh yeah, I was extensively involved in all of that, and I'm blessed to be involved in it. Truthfully, there was no greater opportunity in my long investigative career in government and the private sector and Judicial Watch than having the opportunity to review Huma Abedin's email traffic, 20,000 of them,
right,
which revealed a wealth of information about the corruption of Hillary Clinton in terms of the pay-for-play corruption at the Clinton Foundation and of her egregious abuse of national security.
Will we ever see an
laws.
Investigation of the pay-for-play stuff? Because I think that's really something. There is a lot of evidence, a lot of email traffic that suggests that in order to get favorable consideration at the State Department by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, one had to go do business with the Clinton Foundation first. Donations needed to be made, speeches arranged, and then all of a sudden there was a door that would open for you and you could do business at the State Department. Under any definition, that's pay for play, and yet it seems like we don't hear anything more about that investigation.
You're absolutely right, and we hear that all the time. Tom Fitton, our friend Tom, my boss Tom Fitton, gets that question all the time. I get it all the time from our own members. They say, well, it's wonderful that you're exposing all of this information to the light of day, but what's going to happen? Unfortunately, we don't have law enforcement authorities, but we do make referrals for criminal investigations, for example, to to Congress, to the Federal Election Commission, if that comes into play. there's just so many, there's just so much we can do, and our primary role, as you know, is just to bring all of this to light, to publicize the corruption, and hopefully get other media to then pick up our stories and run with them in the mainstream media. And then if enough political pressure is brought to bear as a result of that exposure, hopefully something gets done. But you're right, there's something, she needs to be held to account.
So when you're an investigator and you're digging through volumes, and it's slow, methodical work, many times. But then all of a sudden you reach that moment where, wow, oh my gosh, aha, this is the smoking gun. Have you ever had a moment like that, and describe it?
Yesterday, yeah. I'm going through, among other things, Peter Strzok and Lisa Page communications. Those have been a wealth. Just follow our reporting on this story, which we issue a press release every couple of weeks now, based on these productions of records that we're getting from the FBI. I just recently got Bruce Orr's communications with Nellie Orr and Glenn Simpson. I can tell you right now, there is dynamite material in this. This is the fifth production. The first four productions I've got of records were his expense reports, his travels and that sort of thing. We have to go through a lot of chaff like that to find.
Because a lot of times they'll throw stuff at you just to slow you down.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. I mean that's the old inundate with paper kind of approach. But we go through it all, and probably 90% of what we look at turns out to be what we would call chaff, useless material. But that 10% or the 20% that's valuable can be immensely valuable.
All right, so you say dynamite stuff. Give us a little headline.
Well, I'll just say that Bruce Orr and Glenn Simpson were having discussions post-election that I found fairly shocking in terms of the collaboration that was going on between the Department of Justice and one of Hillary's paid operatives, Glenn Simpson. These people, in my view, 100 to 200 people should be arrested, indicted, and prosecuted, up to including Hillary Clinton and perhaps even the former president, for trying to subvert, using the technological resources and laws of the United States, the opposition party's presidential candidate, and then, once he was elected, when their first effort failed, to undermine his presidency. That's a coup. And that can't be said strongly enough or overemphasized.
Well, the suggestion is that they used the national technical means of this country.
Yes.
That means our ability to spy on someone. And it was all, they knew how to work the system and send off the alarm bells, knowing full well that the information they were presenting was totally made up stuff.
Absolutely. They salted bogus evidence, bogus intelligence into the national security apparatus to get a falsely predicated counterintelligence investigation going against the opposition party's presidential candidate. It does not get any worse than that. We have not had a political crisis in this country of this magnitude since the Civil War, and I would argue that at least the opposition in the Civil War, that is the leaders of the Confederacy, were honorable enough to openly declare their hostility to the incoming Republican president.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for the work that you do on behalf of Judicial Watch. I'm glad that there's somebody out there going through all of this stuff, meticulously looking through the chaff, looking for those emails of gold that tell us the real story about what goes on behind the scenes of government, the things they don't want us to know.
Well, thank you very much.
It's good to meet you. Thank you so much. See, that's what Judicial Watch is really all about. They spend hours and hours and hours going through and doing what used to be called investigative reporting. You see, that's a lost art. There are so many people now who don't know how to perform that kind of function. There are not many news organizations that have an appetite for that kind of stuff. So it takes somebody like Judicial Watch to sue the government, to get the documents, to dig through the stuff. And as he said, sometimes we dig through a lot of documents and we don't find much, but then eventually we get to the point where we actually learn something. We get that aha document, which reveals to us for the very first time what was really going on behind the scenes. That's what Judicial Watch does. That's what Judicial Watch brings to the table. And we are so fortunate to have an organization through your support that allows them to do that. Well, again, we're going to pull back and have another reveal of our next guest. Hello, you are Sarah Webb. Sarah Anderson, I'm sorry. Yep. Sarah Anderson, a little tiny writing on my finger. Sarah Anderson with Freedom Works. How are you doing? Tell me about Freedom Works and what it is that you do and what you're focused on.
Yeah, so Freedom Works, we're a grassroots policy advocacy group based in Washington, D.C., but really our power does come from all of our activists across the country. We've got about 6 million folks out there who are committed to conservative principles, limited government, limiting the scope of government in our lives, and advancing freedom across the board. So that's what we're involved in, and I'm part of our policy team as Federal Affairs Manager to bring those ideas to Washington and try to make Washington work the way that the American people want it to.
So no better time to do that when conservatives are gathering here at CPAC.
Exactly. There's tons of great ideas out here, and we're hoping to harness that and drive real action to the Hill, to those legislators, and to the executive branch to get them to be responsive to what limited government folks are after.
Help me know what it is that you think are the big issues right now. And from Freedom Works perspective, what are the things you care most about?
Big issues that we're looking at this year, top of the list, budget and spending. Next to that, healthcare. We're looking at some privacy concerns and some free speech issues with H.R. 1, the For the People Act. We call it the For the Politicians Act or the Incumbent Protection Act. And then we're also looking towards some of the climate issues. We've got Andrew Wheeler now confirmed at EPA, which is great to carry on the legacy of Scott Pruitt, but calling out the alarmism and the stuff included in the Green New Deal, the new resolution from Ed Markey and Ocasio-Cortez.
It would seem to me that somebody who looks at things and likes facts and numbers and for things to make logical sense, you must look at the Green New Deal and your head must just explode.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And we had Dr. Holtz-Eakin, who was a former head of the CBO, did a score on the Green New Deal recently, and they came up with somewhere between, over a span of 10 years, $51 trillion and $93 trillion. When you look at our national debt is sitting right now at $22 trillion. Over the span of 10 years, you're looking at quadrupling or even quintupling what our national debt is if there's not a way to pay for it, which in all actuality there is not. So yes, absolutely, the facts don't add up for that, the math doesn't add up, and there's really not a way to go there.
And so how then do you take the ideas that you care about, principally the idea of limited government, which is a very conservative principle. Yeah. Sometimes I think we lose sight of that.
Absolutely.
But it's really one of the things that makes conservatives conservative. We believe that small government, that government which governs best, is that which governs least.
Yep.
That whole concept is a
Absolutely.
very conservative idea. How do you then take that and turn it into policy that gets the change you want to see?
Right. Well, I think I'll give you an example in the healthcare space. Included in the Green New Deal and in a lot of Democratic proposals now, Representative Jayapal has introduced a new Medicare for All bill. When we're looking at that, that's single-payer healthcare, right? That's taking healthcare decisions away from the people and giving it to the government. Of course, Obamacare put us on the path toward that. And Republicans need to be looking toward ways to dismantle Obamacare and go outside of the structure of what that does, which is government regulations. So, for example, there's competing ideas on the Republican side of how you address the healthcare question. Unfortunately, one of them is the idea of preventing states and preventing hospitals from charging individuals for a surprise bill at a hospital for an out-of-network care.
Right.
Of course, that's a devastating situation. You go to the hospital, it's not in network, but you need the care, and so you get it and you're stuck with a large bill. That problem is a problem created by Obamacare. So the solution to that is to eliminate Obamacare, start expanding those networks back out so insurance companies are taking more care, have more hospitals in their system so that people aren't stuck with those bills. Unfortunately, the idea of forcing insurance companies to foot that bill themselves, the consumer ends up paying that in the end anyway. So the point here is looking toward Obamacare and looking toward the healthcare system, finding ways to dismantle it from the inside instead of working within that structure. So we need to repeal Obamacare, which is what Republicans were elected to do, instead of playing into the system that drives us further towards single payer.
As you walk around CPAC over the last few days, you may have noticed there are a lot of young people, really smart, engaged young people just like you. Does that excite you? I mean, it does me when I see young people who are espousing conservative ideas and absorbing conservative ideas to take back with them as they leave here.
Yeah, it really does. And the most important thing...
You've probably been coming for a while, haven't you?
Absolutely. The most important thing that people can stick to when I see all these young people around here is stick to the principles that you believe in. That's limited government conservatism. That's that individuals know what's best for themselves and their neighbor than the government does, and especially than Washington does. So when you view things from that framework and start to put the decisions in every aspect back to the people, that's where you're going to see success, and that's what I hope that these young folk will remember.
And what's the most interesting thing you've seen here at CPAC?
Most interesting thing I think I've seen here is just the level of excitement for what's going on in Washington. This is an era where people are more politically involved than I think we've seen in a long time. The accessibility of individuals to their politicians via Twitter, the president has played up on this, and other members are taking notice. There's some good new members in Congress, Congressman Tim Burchett, Congressman Chip Roy, who are really taking to Twitter to communicate directly to their constituents what's going on in Washington. That's the type of transparency we need, and so I think by everyone coming here to CPAC to Washington and they're able to see things that happen firsthand, we need more of that.
An interesting idea was thrown out on this table maybe about an hour ago. So much of what we're seeing right now and so much of the attention in the mainstream media has to do with the Green New Deal and the socialistic ideas of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, new freshman members who are coming into Congress, getting a lot of attention. Some people have suggested that perhaps what this is all about is throw out those really strange far-left ideas so that the other ideas that Democrats propose seem a lot more reasonable. Do you think that's a possible thing that's going on here? Or is there really a split in the Democrat Party?
I think the progressives have been, and the Democratic Socialist wing of the Democratic Party has been massively successful at presenting their ideas to the American people as this is the way forward, and that pressure has led to more establishment folk in the Democratic Party getting on board with at least some of these ideas. Of course, thankfully, we heard Nancy Pelosi earlier this week say that she thinks single-payer health care, she doesn't know how you pay for it, which I'm in the same boat, Nancy, you know? I don't know how you pay for it, you can't pay for it. But the left has been exceedingly good at presenting these ideas that are their pipe dreams as something that should be pursued. And I think conservatives need to do a better job of presenting our real limited government free market proposals as what needs to happen to get Republicans back on board with cutting spending, back on board with the conservative promises of repealing Obamacare, deregulating, further cutting taxes to advance liberty.
What is your background? Where did you go to school and how did you get involved in all this?
So I grew up out in Northern Virginia. I went to college in Virginia at the College of William & Mary. After 3 years at the school, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I was a limited government conservative, leaning libertarian, the Rand Paul, Mike Lee types of folks. And so I was more than happy when I discovered FreedomWorks, read all about it, was right up my alley, and so I'm very happy to be here. And I feel like I'm able to carry out my principles every day, the ones I believe in and the ones that I believe are best for the country.
And who are the politicians that you see on the scene that excite you the most right now?
The ones that excite me the most, at least on the freshman members, like I mentioned, Chip Roy and Tim Burchett, along with some folks who are continuing to keep up the good work in Congress. That's Congressman Mark Meadows, Congressman Jim Jordan, of course, Congressman Justin Amash and Thomas Massey. Those folks, the voices for the Constitution, they often point out, we swore to defend and protect the Constitution, and that's defending the rights of the people, and that's what's going to be best for everyone.
Wow, you are an incredibly gifted spokesman for your cause.
Well, thank you.
And I'm very impressed, and I'm so pleased to have met you. Good to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Sarah Anderson with FreedomWorks, thank you so much for joining us here on the JW stage. I'm Brian Wilson, your host today here on JWTV. That stands for Judicial Watch TV. We are here at CPAC 2019. It is the gathering of conservatives from around the country. They come here each year and to exchange ideas, walk away engaged and excited about the things that are going on. And we also hear from great conservative thinkers of our time on the main stage. Here at the Judicial Watch booth, what happens is we just line up all these smart people. And believe me, this place is crawling with smart, thoughtful people. And I'm walking away here after having done this now almost for 2 days, picking up so much new information and new ideas. That's what this whole CPAC thing is about. You get together, you exchange ideas, you sit down over a drink, you sit down over a meal, you discuss these ideas, and at the end of the day, when you leave here, you are engaged and excited about things that are happening in the conservative movement. Joining me now here at our little JWTV booth is Cameron Gray. Cameron, tell me a little bit about your background.
Brian, first of all, it's an honor to be here with you, especially on Judicial Watch. You are on a station in Tennessee, in Nashville, Tennessee, your day job.
WTN, right.
I used to be the assistant producer of the G. Gordon Liddy Show, and in the 90s, early 2000s, we were on WTN, 99.7.
99.7,
and,
right.
Just so much love for that station, and so it's wonderful to meet you finally.
If I may be allowed, it's a real powerhouse station in Middle Tennessee.
It still has like a gigantic signal, right?
It's an unbelievably strong signal and an unbelievably engaged audience.
Exactly.
And I'm very honored to be be part of that operation?
We once did a remote from the stage of the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah.
Which was, that's a fun place to do a remote.
Tell me what you're involved with now.
Right now, I'm just involved in conservative commentating, working with shows here. I'm longtime producers. I used to work on NRA TV, like I said, the G. Gore Liddy Show. Just a long time in conservative politics. This is my 26th CPAC.
As 26?
Yes.
You've been coming for a lot of years.
Since I was a babe in arms.
Tell me about what you see going on here inside the swamp. What is catching your attention?
It's interesting because there's, and you've seen this, Brian, so much talk of AOC, right? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it's kind of, it's to me, it's a mixed signal because you don't want to give her too much credit because you kind of inflate her sense of worth and inflate her celebrity, but you also don't want to ignore her because at the core of it, she's an engaging, attractive young woman who is getting a lot of traction with her Green New Deal and stuff. But the thing that gets me is, because I'm a Jewish conservative, and it is so hard sometimes to be a Jewish conservative because Judaism in America is dominated by the leftist causes. And what we're seeing right now with this freshman class of AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, this bubbling anti-Semitism that we're seeing, that people are excusing, it's not anti-Semitism, it's just criticizing Israel. But we're also seeing a woman like Ilhan Omar go against most Western countries and saying that they won't recognize Guadano in Venezuela. I mean, just crazy ideas that are mainstreaming. The cover of Rolling Stone was Omar and Tlaib and AOC and Nancy Pelosi. This is her group now.
So in other words, it's easy for conservatives to mock and laugh at some of these ideas. But don't ignore the fact that they are getting some traction and some attention,
100%.
and they're finding people who actually think these are great ideas.
Absolutely,
and we can't go to sleep on it.
No, we can't. There's just so much going, and they're getting so much traction. And right, the idea of this, the newness, the freshness, the cover of the Rolling Stone, the celebrity, all these TV shows. But yeah, we're sometimes we're missing some of the more I would say evil's a strong word, but the worser parts of their philosophies, their politics, and I think people need to pay more attention to that. And just jokes are one thing, and flatulent cows, you can have as much fun as you want with it, but at the core of it,
and I have actually,
as you should, but at the core of it, there's some really a seedy underbelly of a lot of this stuff that I think people need to pay more attention to.
All right. So what's the thing you're walking away from your stay here at the CPAC convention? What is the thing you're walking away with that has changed your thinking or altered your thinking?
It's funny to come to a CPAC when the president is in power. And the president comes here, and when he spoke last year, I think it was the first time since Reagan. He'll be here tomorrow, Saturday. It's funny that there's a sense of just a relief. People aren't on his they're not as edgy. But once again, don't lose sight of the ball. Don't lose sight of the fight. This is going to be a huge fight. We're seeing Jay Inslee, number 13, enter the Democratic ring today. People need to pay attention and don't rest on our laurels just because Trump's in office and people think it's going to be an easy fight to get reelected. There's a lot of people fighting for this job, as you know, and there'll be even more people.
Do you think the president will be challenged in a primary?
No. Oh, well, he might.
Well, there's some talk.
He might. But let's talk about the definition of challenge. There might be a dictionary definition of challenge, but a John Kasich, a Larry Hogan type. Come on, Brian. It's never happening.
Yeah.
it's never
Larry
happening.
Hogan is a very interesting figure in that he is a Republican who won election in a very Democrat state.
Right.
But he's also a Republican with a lot of Democratic policies.
It's easy to make
because you can't actually win in Maryland if you're a hard-nosed conservative.
No, not at all. And he has been he's been, I don't know, he's not the most vocal Trump detractor. He certainly has issues with President Trump. He's not a fan of his, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So what else are you going to take away having been here and talk? I mean, you walk down the hallway, you never know who you're going to bump into. No, and
here's a funny thing. Maybe it's a little bit behind the scenes for your audience, but when people walk by, and you've seen this, you're right from this hallway here, I'm always interested with this Nigel Farage behind us. There'll be an entourage soon. I'm always interested about the sizes of the entourages. Because this year, it was like the biggest audience, entourage for Diamond and Silk. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they love him.
Yeah.
But Brian, I think if you saw this, you would have been as perplexed as I was. Glenn Beck had no entourage. he was walking through the hallways as kind of like almost anonymous.
Yeah.
And Glenn Beck, years ago, it would have been, you couldn't have been in. So it's funny I always come here and I always like to see the state of conservatism. And I think it's very telling that Glenn Beck, or even Nigel Farage, I mean, if we're looking at him right now, a huge audience, gets a bigger crowd than a Glenn Beck type. I think it says a lot about conservatism.
Tell me a little bit about, I know you have an appreciation, as I do, for the folks at Judicial Watch.
Yes,
why is their mission important, and talk a little bit about the things they do.
Brian, it's unbelievable. And I'm so glad that they hired you to do this because you're such a good voice for them. The stuff that Tom Fitton does for Judicial Watch is, it's almost angering, because as a citizen, at the end of the day, we shouldn't need Judicial Watch.
Right.
Judicial Watch does the things that most of the times weak GOP won't do. Forget the Democrats, that's just never going to happen. But they fight hard for conservative causes, for the rule of law, and without Judicial Watch, so many things here in this town would never happen. And it's sad to say that, but thankfully there is a Judicial Watch, and people who are watching and listening and should be supporting, donating, staying part. It's such a fabulous organization.
My guest is Cameron Gray, who is here to talk about current events and the things he sees in Washington with a good jaundiced eye. That's what you need. It's good to see you.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break right now. We need to let everybody get a drink of water and take care of business. We'll be back in just a short while. Stay right where you are, right here on JWTV.
Go through.
I've seen that, Joe.
You know how many steps there are in it? 120. And after almost each one of those 120, there's the ability for naysayers to litigate. That's why it takes so long. In many infrastructure projects, the costs of lawyers and environmental advisors and paperwork people can be as much as 30% of the whole project. So it delays decisions and it costs money. And it isn't just environment, energy. We've freed up energy. As you know, we're now the world's largest energy producer, and we're becoming the world's largest energy exporter. That's a tremendous, powerful development from a geopolitical point of view, because it removes our dependency on a very complicated part of the world, namely the Mideast. It's not that we don't want to be allies with the Mideast, we do, but it's nice not to be dependent on anybody. That's one of the good things energy did. The other thing it did, it brought costs down. Electric utility costs have gone down, importantly because of natural gas. The trade balance is getting better, gradually will get better because of LNG. So it has power. So regulatory was one big thing.
Absolutely.
The other big thing is tax reform. Individual people, tax reform. And I thought it was quite ludicrous that the Democrats were initially complaining that the refunds, the first batch, were lower than they had been a year before. You know why? Because the people got the refunds up front. We cut the rates.
Yeah.
So how would you get more back if you had put less in? Anyhow, so individual tax reform was powerful, and corporate tax reform, in some ways even more powerful. The ability to write off capital expenditures is huge. And if you look at the recent gross domestic product figures, corporate investment, both in software and in physical assets, is a big contributor to the economic boom.
Well, and a strong economic hand also strengthens our overall hand with adversaries and trade deals and things like that.
It does. Everything multiplies on itself.
It sure does. Mr. Ambassador, we've only got a couple minutes left here. Even in Japan, I'm sure you see what the fake news media, the left-wing media says about this president and his accomplishments. But from where you sit, as someone in this administration, wrap up your view of how the president is engaging with the world, views the world, and is leading America.
The president is very popular in Japan. I was just visiting Osaka Gas earlier this week, one of the largest gas consumers in Japan. They're going to receive their first shipment of U.S. LNG this year. As president, As the President says, as Secretary Perry is fond of saying, we're not just exporting energy, we're exporting freedom. They're reducing their dependence on Russia, on the Middle East, just as the Secretary said. They are getting a better business model and a better price and a better feedstock for everything that they're doing, thanks to America.
And behind stage, you can clap for that. That's cool. Backstage, you mentioned briefly a story about Nissan, too, a good news story of trade deals.
Terrific news, and my compliments to the Secretary and the leadership of the USMCA, because Japan just announced this week that Nissan is going to move the manufacture of its luxury engines that are manufactured in Japan today are going to move to my home state of Tennessee. That's American jobs. That's more capital here. That's great news.
No, it's the type of intended consequence of you think former NAFTA, Canada, Mexico, you don't think jobs coming from Japan, but that's exactly how it lays out. Mr. Secretary, we've only got about 45 seconds left. Your final thoughts.
Just to pick up on that, the real target that we had with the USMCA was imports from Southeast Asia, because they were the big beneficiaries, because the treaty was originally written in such a way that it had a huge loophole for foreign parts to come in. What they did was they specified individual parts. Well, that was decades ago. Most of those parts aren't even used in cars anymore. So it proved to be a very worthless treaty in that regard, and the percentage requirements were too low and didn't have a specific requirement for high-income areas. We fixed all that with the new thing, and it's a combination of USMCA and the fear of auto tariffs is why we're suddenly getting these things in.
Pretty nice to have adults in charge, right? Thank you for being here. I'll close by saying, by the way, this is being streamed live on Fox Nation as well, the new online streaming platform of Fox News Channel. If you don't have Fox Nation, you're missing out, okay? It's Netflix for conservatives. I've got a great documentary coming about Jerusalem in a couple of weeks and months, so stay tuned. Lots of great stuff coming on Fox Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, join me, Ambassador Bill Hagerty, Secretary Wilbur Ross. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our next panel, examining the contributions of the only democracy in the Middle East. Please welcome Ambassador Yoram Ettinger of the Ettinger Report, Professor Eugene Kantorovich of George Mason University, and Eli Piepsh of Yesha Council, moderated by La'ana Meisel of the Tikva Fund.
Hello, CPAC. Hey. I think that between the four of us, we've flown something like 24,000 miles to be here with you. And it's wonderful, and you're all fantastic, and this event is so much fun, and it's been worth every single mile. So, right? Yes?
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Okay. So let's get started. America loves Israel, and American conservatives especially love Israel. That's right. And Israel loves America. And as the ACU learned when they joined me in Israel in 2017, the reasons and the expression of this relationship, the reasons for and the expression of it, go much farther than most people realize. American financial and political support and American ideas, most importantly of all, have really helped build an exceptional society in the Middle East. And today we're going to look at some of the strategic, cultural, and economic contributions that Israel makes to the world. So with that, I want to turn to our panelists. Eugene, you teach law and you are an expert in geopolitics. Could you just give us a quick overview of the value of having a Western ally in the Middle East, like Israel?
If you look at a map of the world, from all the way in Northwest Africa, Morocco, all the way as far as Iran and beyond, there is an unbroken line of authoritarian governments, dictatorships, and countries deeply hostile to American values. In that long line of countries that spans a third of the globe, there's one little dot that breaks it up. And having that dot be there, as opposed to having it not be there, makes a vital strategic difference to the United States. It's a question of whether there's an unbroken, continuous plane of hostile countries, hostile monarchies, Islamist states, or whether there's a little island, a beacon in the middle. And what's amazing about Israel is regardless of the state of geopolitics, those chain of countries have had difficult relationships with America. During the Cold War, many of them, Syria, Egypt, Algeria, were Soviet allies. So Israel was a vital player in the Cold War, the one island of pro-American Western democracy against the Soviet bloc. And indeed, Soviet troops, in a little-known fact, were actually deployed against Israel in both the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War in 1973. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, so you think, who needs Israel anymore? We're after the Cold War. And before you know it, an entire new wave of hostile ideologies sweeps the Middle East, and where Soviet communism had previously been ascendant, it's replaced with a new ideology, in many ways more dangerous, radical Islamism. And as that's sweeping the Middle East, there's again only one country that breaks the flow, that breaks the continuity of Islamicism. And I think what drives home the importance of Israel most concretely is the current war in Syria and the current attempt of Iran to become a power and take over the Middle East. So many countries have participated in bombing campaigns against ISIS, and ISIS was ultimately defeated. ISIS was an extremely dangerous anti-Western element. We were right to oppose it. Israel is the only country other than the United States to fight both ISIS on one hand and Iran on the other hand. Israel is the only country to have said, there's no good here between ISIS and the Syrians and the Iranians. Other than the United States, Israel is the only country to bomb both, and that's a major contribution to global peace and security.
It is. Yoram, building on Eugene's point, maybe we can concretize some of that with some examples unique to America. You've worked a lot with the American Congress. America sends Israel an aid package every year that's quite substantial and important. What does America get back in terms of saved lives or saved money? If you could give us a couple of examples, that would be great.
Well, first and foremost, Israel is immensely grateful to the U.S. for providing the vast majority of defense technologies and defense equipment which is required by Israel to survive in the Middle East. However, contrary to conventional wisdom, the U.S. does not extend foreign aid to Israel. In fact, in reality, the U.S. makes an annual investment in Israel, and the question is, what is the extent of the rate of return? And I'm going to share with you the facts about the rate of return of a few 100% annually in real tangible terms, in dollar terms. For instance, Israel received from the U.S., is receiving from the U.S. the F-16 combat airplane manufactured by Lockheed Martin in Fort Worth, Texas, for which, again, we are very grateful. However, on a daily basis, we have shared lessons learned by the Israeli Air Force with the manufacturer. We have become the most unique battle-tested laboratory for Lockheed Martin and for the entire U.S. defense industry. Those lessons have been transformed into well over 600 modifications in the current generation of the F-16. Upon visiting the plant, I asked the plant manager if he could quantify it in terms of dollars. The response was ballpark, mega billion-dollar bonanza to the manufacturer. We save years of research and development. We promote the competitiveness of American products throughout the world, and that basically means more export and wider base of employment. We are talking about the late General Alexander Haig, who was Commander-in-Chief, Supreme Commander of NATO forces, later on Secretary of State, and his reference to Israel was that Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier, which doesn't require a single American on board, deployed in the most critical area for America's national security, and cannot be sunk. He concluded his reference to Israel by saying, if there were not a Jewish state in the western flank of the Middle East, then the U.S. would have to deploy few more real aircraft carriers to the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea and the Mediterranean to deploy more ground forces, all of which would have cost the American taxpayer something between $15 and $20 billion every single year, all of which is saved by one Jewish state. To sum up this very tiny synopsis of the huge inventory of benefits to America from its ally in the Middle East, Israel, I would say that when it comes to 4th down and 10 yards to go, with 6 minutes on the clock and 5 points behind, the American quarterback can trust the Israeli wide receiver to catch the ball and score the winning touchdown.
Eli, Yoram just mentioned some of the massive economic benefits that we get from the military cooperation and assistance. I'm wondering if I could turn to you to discuss some of the kind of better known economic miracle of Startup Nation. Israel is a high-tech wonder, an agricultural wonder. It's founded in a place with very few resources. It went from having no state 70 years ago to just having the first ever privately funded space launch a few weeks ago. That's where the, yeah. And I was hoping you could talk about some of Israeli innovations, whether in agriculture or humanitarian aid or elsewhere, that really help the world. And then beyond that, you do something very specific and unique with economic development in Judea and Samaria. So I was hoping you could share that with the crowd.
It'd be my pleasure. First question is, what is Judea and Samaria? Judea and Samaria, often mischaracterized as the West Bank, is a region that Israel liberated from Jordanian rule in 1967, terminated the racist policy of forbidding Israelis and Jews to live in that region. Subsequent to that auspicious start, that auspicious history, Israelis have built a model of economic coexistence in the region where Israelis and Palestinians are able to work together. And in fact, just last week, we launched a brand new initiative, the initiative of my good friend Avi Zimmerman, an Israeli Jew, together with Ashraf Jabari, an Arab Muslim, to create the first ever Judea and Samaria Chamber of Commerce that will be allowing. It allows us to look at the region as a beacon of coexistence, how we can work together, live together, and I think that's something that's extremely important. And again, not here trying to suggest that economics alone is going to resolve the entire conflict, or to put in more contemporary terms for Representative Ilan Omar to understand, it's not all about the Benjamins. However, economic coexistence is critically important in creating a climate where future trust, we can build a culture that we're living together, and therefore I believe that this Chamber of Commerce itself is probably one of the most important chambers of commerce in the entire world. But as you said, there's a lot more than Judea and Samaria. Israel is often referred to as a startup nation. And you know, you look at a country as small as Israel, yet from a humanitarian perspective, we're all over the place. Israel has sent humanitarian aid to Houston, where my sister lives, when we had the flood, where Houston had the flood a couple years ago. Just now sent aid all the way to Brazil when they had a major bridge collapse. And it's not just that. Israel's even sent aid to Iran. You heard that right. Israel sent aid when Iran was hit by an earthquake, because the fact that the mullahs are horrifically anti-Semitic doesn't prevent Israel's humanitarian instinct to jump into place and say we need to help the Iranians, who frankly probably are friends of Israel. The leaders are not. I think that's a very important point. It's a very important point. That is how Israel is seen in the world. On top of that, we have mentioned other kinds of high tech. Just this week, I saw Israel. There was an announcement of the top 50 fastest growing high tech companies. 6 of them were based in Israel. But it's not just that. You think about something even more substantial. You know, in Israel, even the liberals don't believe in global warming, because in Israel is the only country in the world where the desert is growing smaller. Through phenomenal ag tech and free market water technologies, the desert is actually blooming. And I have to say that that is frankly a phenomenal metaphor, the desert blooming, for all of the growth we're seeing in Israel, which is growing at such a preposterous rate that it would almost be biblical, which I guess you could say is appropriate for the Holy Land.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I'm Brian Wilson, bringing you coverage from Judicial Watch on behalf of Judicial Watch from CPAC 2019. What is CPAC, if you don't know? Conservative Political Action Conference. It's the place where conservatives come to exchange ideas, to hear the great leaders of the conservative movement talk about the things they care about, exchange ideas, and then they all walk away energized and perhaps enriched from the experience. Here at Judicial Watch, you know what Judicial Watch does. They're the ones who are out there always digging around, trying to get information out of the government using the Freedom of Information Act and other things, investigatory techniques. They are very proud to be here, and I'm very proud to be here. My name is Brian Wilson. I'm the host of a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on WTN Radio. If you want to follow me when this is all over, follow me on Twitter at BrianWilson997. Let's talk about our first guest here this afternoon, Jason Johnson, who is the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Jason, good to have you here. What brings you? Why is CPAC a place that you find you need to spend some time?
Well, it's first of all, it's great networking to
come a little closer if you don't mind.
It's great networking to be able to speak with people who are like-minded and
right.
who follow us, our organization, and what we do, and more or less agree with us, and also to get our message out on the media.
Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, it's sort of a self-explanatory title, but talk about the things that you do and the things that you care deeply about.
So we are a nonprofit organization formed in the mid-90s. Over that time, since the mid-90s, we've helped over 70 law enforcement officers who are charged with crimes in connection with their actual duties. So if you think about the 6 police officers charged in Baltimore in connection with the Freddie Gray case,
right.
Officers like that in those situations, we raise money and we help support their defense. We pay for their attorney's fees, expert fees, and so forth.
And you had a very good outcome in that case, as I recall.
We did, and we frequently do have good outcomes because we pick good cases to support.
I would be remiss, being from Nashville, if I did not mention there is a case currently in that city that is very interesting. The case of involving an officer by the name of Andrew Delkey. Makes a traffic stop, somebody jumps out, runs, has a gun, he chases him. There is an exchange of gunfire, the assailant is killed. He is now facing murder charges in Nashville. You're familiar with the case?
I am familiar with the case. On the surface, it appears to be a gross injustice. In all my experience, and I spent over 20 years as a law enforcement officer and executive, I haven't heard of a case where a person armed with a gun, fully loaded gun, that was shot by a police officer resulted in criminal charges against the officer. I just haven't heard it before. So it's a very unusual case, and it's troubling.
So what can you do in situations like that? How do you come to their aid? Obviously, you take donations in from people who believe in law enforcement and are supportive of law enforcement. Then how do you then provide support for them?
Well, we begin a conversation with them and or their attorney, and we find out what the needs are. Different officers in that situation have different needs. Almost all of them require some monetary support to help pay their legal fees. There are also other associated things like expert witness fees and things like that. We even help to support the officers because oftentimes they're unable to work because of their status and they're not getting paid, and they have families and homes, and we don't want them to go bankrupt, and we want to help them as much as we can. So we come up with a customized plan for what the individual officer needs and provide every bit of support that we can provide, and we've been very successful doing it.
All right. Tell me about some of the other successful cases that you've been involved in.
Well, right now we are supporting Agent Andy O'Gwynn in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's a state parole and probation agent. He was sitting at a stoplight one night after he had left work. He's sitting in his departmental car, and he was approached by a gang member, a well-known gang member that happened to be someone that he was supervising, their probation. He was approached in an aggressive manner. He hears a tapping at his car window. He thought the guy had a gun, so he challenged him. At the end of the day, he wound up shooting this individual non-fatally. And now Agent O'Gwynn stands charged with a felony assault against this person, who actually just the other day I learned has now been charged federally. The person that confronted Agent O'Gwynn, his person he was supervising, has been charged federally with distributing methamphetamine. Wow. So that is a great case that we're looking for support for even right now. We've supported many cases over the years, and the most recent of which that I think probably most of your viewers have heard of is the Freddie Gray case in Baltimore.
Yes, of course, the Freddie Gray case. I remember that very well. I was in D.C. at the time, so we followed it very closely. Tell me a little bit, walking the hallways here at CPAC, tell me about the encounters and what you find and why CPAC is a place that you find attractive to come and visit.
Well, I think the folks here, conservatives in general, are supportive of law enforcement.
Yes, they are.
They understand the challenges that are faced by our law enforcement officers, and it's a message that resonates with them. In addition to what I've already described about raising money and helping to provide financial assistance to these officers, we also have a significant part of our mission is educational. We want to train people, or really educate them about the challenges that law enforcement faces. And what we've done is we've actually got a use of force, modern state-of-the-art use of force simulator.
Wow.
The type of simulator that actually law enforcement officers are trained with, and helps them learn how to make use of force decisions. So we put members of the media, stakeholders of all kinds, elected officials and others, we put them into the simulator training and actually provide them the same type of training that law enforcement officers receive. So we discuss that here at CPAC, and we try to recruit members of the media to come to our office in Alexandria, Virginia, and participate in that.
All right, and if people want to learn more about your organization, perhaps they want to be supportive of what you do. I mean, a lot of people care deeply about the men and women in blue, the thin blue line. How might they go about getting in contact with the organization? How might they go about helping you out?
Yeah, well, our website is policedefense.org, policedefense.org. They can visit our website. They can learn more about our organization, our history, cases we're supporting now, cases we've supported in the past, and certainly have an opportunity to send us a note or make a contribution or give us a call on the phone.
It should not be lost that the men and women who wear the badge, the men and women in blue, the first response in times of trouble, have a very, very difficult job. And sometimes it seems in some communities are not very much appreciated for the things they bring to the table. Public safety mainly, trying to make your place where you live a safe place. They're the ones who run toward the trouble when everybody else is running away. And many places you find there's no appreciation for the fact that they put their lives on the line each and every day. And so there's a sort of that is demoralizing, I think, to many men and women who wear the badge.
There's no question about it that being a law enforcement officer is more challenging today than it ever has been. The danger has increased actually in the last several years since I think what we call the Ferguson effect since the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014. The repercussions of that have increased the danger to law enforcement officers. The law enforcement officers have been confronted by angry people, sometimes armed people, sometimes people with video cameras. The respect for law enforcement has gone down. This has had a big impact on the ability of law enforcement agencies to recruit the strongest candidates.
And in fact, there are many people who make judgments about what law enforcement people do, and they have perfect 20/20 hindsight when these decisions are being made, in many cases, in a matter of nanoseconds. A matter of less than a second, you got to make a decision.
Yeah, and that's what we try to address in our simulator training is to allow people who have never been in a situation like that to appreciate what you just said, which is the split-second decision-making that has to happen. And we really try to reinforce with those folks two things to keep in mind when you hear of one of these types of situations involving a law enforcement officer, and that is don't rush to judgment, wait till the facts come out, and don't perpetuate false narratives.
Jason Johnson, president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. It is a pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much for dropping by our Judicial Watch booth here. Stay right there. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, welcome back to Judicial Watch headquarters. I'm your host, Bruce Schlussman. With me today, we have Bob Popper, who's a senior attorney with us and director of the Election Integrity Project. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So, first question, why don't you tell us a little bit about election integrity?
Well, it involves a lot of things and a lot of lawsuits that we get involved with. A number of them are lawsuits defending the rights of jurisdictions to demand voter ID, to manage or regulate same-day registration or out-of-precinct voting, and it can get into a lot of practices that affect election integrity. Our primary focus right now is enforcing the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, which requires states, federal law requiring states to clean up their voter rolls and get rid of registrations for people who have long since moved out of the state or who have died.
So we just recently had that huge victory in California in Los Angeles County that you were a big part of. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that lawsuit?
Well, sure. What we discovered in Los Angeles and in California and the entire state was that Los Angeles in particular had a registration rate of 112%. This means that they had more registered voters than they had citizens over the age of 18 who could register lawfully. The entire state of California had a registration rate of 101%. And what we learned is that they have a large number of people who are believed to have moved out of state and who under federal law should have been tested, should have been sent a letter saying, are you still there? And then after a period of time of 2 general federal elections, so 2 to 4 years, this is all statutory, they should have been removed. And what we learned is that the Clinton administration, no less, Attorney General Janet Reno gave them a pass in 1998 and told them they could stop doing that, stop removing people. So they've been dutifully notifying people or asking them if they've moved, noting that they probably have, and then just keeping them on the list. And when they're on the list, those registrations can be voted. People can show up and say, no, that's me, and cast a ballot. So it matters if you have too many registrations. Now, they had something like almost a quarter of their registrations are people who probably have moved out of state. Almost a quarter of the voter registrations in Los Angeles County. And we reached a settlement agreement with them after starting a lawsuit, pursuant to which they have to send letters as required by the NVRA, remove those they can remove, and remove the rest according to the process of federal law. And I mean, what I like to tell people is it's as if the NVRA just got passed in California. In a lot of respects, they're starting this process, something they haven't done since 1998. And you know, the numbers are staggering. There's 1.5 million people who are believed to have moved out of Los Angeles County. And since the active voter registration rolls are about 5 million people, that's a lot. That's a huge number. 1.5 million is bigger than the population, I think, of almost 10 individual states. It's a lot of people.
And so they're removing these people off the voting rolls, and is Judicial Watch enforcing this, or is the government enforcing it?
We have a settlement agreement with them, which runs through early 2025.
Okay.
So it encompasses a number of elections, and we'll be able to see how they're doing. In the event we don't think that they're complying, we can go back to the federal judge in whose court we were, and we can open up the case and ask him to enforce this agreement. So that threat is there, and we will make sure that the agreement is complied with.
And this isn't the only victory Judicial Watch has had in the courts with election integrity. Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of those other victories this year and last?
Well, we have a settlement agreement from last year, from 2018, with Kentucky. We discovered that in Kentucky, 48 counties in Kentucky had more voter registrations than citizens eligible to register. And it's a similar sort of dynamic to that was at play in Los Angeles, which is that in 2012, Secretary of State Grimes came in. And since that time, the NVRA simply has stopped being enforced when it comes to Section 8. They simply didn't remove people. They didn't even, unlike Los Angeles, they didn't even send them letters. They didn't even ask them if they're still in the state or if they're, still registered voters in Kentucky.
So just negligence then?
Complete. Negligence is a funny way to describe, I think, deliberately stopping.
Deliberately stopping, okay,
yeah.
Okay. So this was more
that's
deliberate,
what they did.
Yeah.
I would call this intentional.
Intentional, okay.
Yeah, and the result is that the rolls are inflated and we have a process. And this one is a court-ordered consent judgment, which means it's not just an agreement the court will enforce if we have to.
Okay.
This is a court order, so it's enforceable by contempt of court. And so, yes, we mark that as a victory. We also have a victory from a few years ago in Ohio, a statewide settlement that has spawned litigation that is still ongoing. And last year we submitted amicus briefs in response to what was going on in that lawsuit. And last year there was a decision in the United States Supreme Court regarding the Ohio agreement that went our way. So that's continuing to keep us moving and excited. And I would add we also had a success in Indiana, if not an agreement, which is that we sued Indiana, and Indiana fixed its voter rolls, and as a result the case became moot. So we've really had successes in 4 states, I would say.
That's incredible. And so you've been leading this a long time. Would you say this is probably one of the more successful years on record then, or?
Yeah, I would. And, I would add that I used to work for the Justice Department, and a large part of what I did was enforcing the NVRA and making sure that states removed people who probably have moved to other states or have died. And I would say that my work at Judicial Watch is more successful than the work I managed to do at the Department of Justice. And it's just sort of the nature of who we were pursuing and what we were doing. I think the California settlement is the biggest settlement in the history of the NVRA.
That's incredible.
Been around since '93, so it's a big win.
It's incredible. So with Kentucky and this process, as that's being enforced, you mentioned it's a court order and they could be held in contempt of court. Is that the same thing with California? Can they be held in contempt of court if they don't comply?
No, in a way it's a subtle difference,
okay.
But it is a difference. In California, this is sort of in the weeds. The legal process in California is that the court has a retained jurisdiction to enforce the agreement. If we believe there's been substantial noncompliance, we go to the federal judge and say, we want you to enforce this agreement.
Okay.
In Kentucky, if we believe that there's been a violation of any provision of the agreement, we go to court and say, we want you to enforce your order, Your Honor.
Yeah.
We could even move for contempt of court.
Okay.
Now, the standards for obtaining enforcement of the consent judgment in Kentucky are somewhat similar to those for obtaining enforcement of the agreement in California. But as I say, a lot of it's a distinction without a difference. In both cases, we're enforcing the agreement in federal court.
And recently there was this whole big thing in Florida with Brenda Snipes and the whole mishaps and misfirings and probably deliberate fraud there in Florida. So I know we sent someone down there. We did a little bit of investigation. Is there going to be a lawsuit into what happened? And I believe it was Broward County.
Yes.
In Broward County.
I don't know. There were irregularities there. There were strange things that happened, and I mean they've been amply documented in the press.
Okay.
For example, where something like 2,000 ballots went missing, just as a technical matter, went missing. The staff could not locate them, and I think Snipes' immortal comment was something to the effect of, "We know they're in the building somewhere." We're focusing on that. We're looking at that. We're looking at California, at the recent ballot harvesting statute and the ballot harvesting initiative that has gained so much national attention. Recently, they ordered a new election in North Carolina.
I saw. That's incredible.
Yeah, based on unlawful ballot harvesting.
Yeah.
The difference between North Carolina and California is in California it's lawful. It's not lawful to throw away people's ballots, but it is lawful for strangers to knock on your door to offer to take your ballot to the polls. And these are strangers who do not work for the state. These could be, they could be anyone. Most typically, I imagine, campaign workers. They could be union members. They could be minors. They could be high school kids. They could be non-citizens because they are not tracked. The people who pick up the ballots and transfer them to the officials to count them are not tracked. And what happened in North Carolina was partisans went to neighborhoods that supported the opponent, collected ballots, and threw them out. Well, there's no way to prevent that. So we're looking seriously at that. And there's a federal agency, the Election Assistance Commission, that releases new data this year about how many people are registered in every county in the country. And we're going to look at that again and try to determine who has more voter registrations than citizens over the age of 18. Always a marker that there might be a problem.
So wrapping up here, where do you think Judicial Watch goes from here? You mentioned we're going to try some lawsuits with ballot harvesting as it's become a huge issue.
We're thinking about it. We're analyzing.
We're thinking about it. Okay. So where does Judicial Watch go from here with all these lawsuits and going forward looking at maybe some other states like California that are problematic in their voter rolls?
Yeah, we'll look at other states. We'll look at other individual counties. We already have our suspicions about where problems might lie. I think we go into those lawsuits to the extent we file them, and I think it's guaranteed that we will. We go in with enhanced credibility because of the settlements we've made in California and Kentucky and Ohio. And we're going to proceed with that, and we're going to proceed with looking at all the bizarre and strange ways that people subvert election integrity. And I think the problem with politics today is that people subvert election integrity under the claim that they're increasing access or helping people vote. And while that can be true, it's often not today. Ballot harvesting is no friend of election integrity or access. So, we're going to continue to look at those kinds of procedures, and it takes an insider's knowledge and legal ability to look at these and determine where there's a claim, but that's what we have.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation about our election integrity project. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
And we are back at National Harbor for CPAC 2019 coverage from the Judicial Watch booth. You're watching JWTV. I'm Brian Wilson, your host on behalf of Judicial Watch. If you don't know, CPAC is where the great conservative minds come to discuss the issues of the day. And my guest is certainly among one of the great conservative institutions in the nation, but also based out of Washington, D.C., the Media Research Center. Dan Gaynor is my guest, and you're a vice president for Tech Watch, Business and Culture over at Media Research Center. For those who don't know, explain what it is you do at the Media Research Center.
Well, we're a check and a balance against the liberal media. And so what we've been around for 32 years. And what we do, we monitor not just the broadcast networks, cable networks, newer media, entertainment media, and now we've even shifted to doing Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, and that world as well.
And of course, one of the things you find if you do any kind of monitoring of these institutions, these media institutions, is there seems to be a great disparity from the kinds of stories that are covered in a positive way about conservative issue and the stories that are covering regarding more liberal issues.
Well, I mean, this is how you end up with ridiculous hate hoaxes like Jussie Smollett and the Covington School, where the media reflexively take the left-wing position on every bit of news and everything that happens in any given day. I mean, if you imagine 33% of the country is conservative, but your typical journalist lands in the 28% that's liberal. So there's conservatives, there's moderates, and then there's liberals over here, and they're at least in the middle or maybe even to the left of that.
How much of it, and this is, I always think, an interesting discussion among people when you talk about journalistic bias, how much of it is active bias and how much of it is passive bias? And by passive bias, I mean there are people who go out there and report stories, and it's just because of the way they were raised, the people they hang around, where they went to school. They just can't imagine that there's another way to look at something. Some of it is active, some of it, they say, is passive or unintentional.
Oh, yeah. I think basically the living in the bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good mix of both.
I think you're right.
I mean, you look at somebody like Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd, started his career working for a liberal politician, and then his wife works for liberal politicians. I mean, she is a consultant for such. So he's surrounded by the bubble, and then when he comes on and says, oh, well, this is what's going on, you understand, Chuck Todd's not socializing with a lot of the people from here.
I mean, it's the people his kids go to school with, they all have that view. Maybe they go to church and they have the same kind of view. They are, because Washington, D.C. really is, it's a really liberal bubble. It is not in any way connected to the way of the rest of the people in the rest of the country look at the world or their viewpoint.
Well, you look, Washington, D.C. voted 93-4, I think it was, for Hillary Clinton and against Donald Trump. I mean, almost a third-party candidate doing better than Donald Trump. And the suburbs are just as bad around D.C. The people who work inside the Beltway in D.C. or work out in New York or L.A., they are in some of the biggest liberal bubbles in the country. Here in D.C., even among conservatives, you end up with the prominent conservatives that are often featured on these media outlets are never Trump conservatives.
Right.
It used to be that the newspapers in the country would always make a point of having columnists that reflect the opinions of the president. Now they don't even do that, so you end up with the right-wing people are never Trumpers there, too.
I read a statistic the other day that shocked me that 6% of Americans, only 6%, now say they get their news from newspapers. Newspapers are a dying art form, and people are getting their news now more from social media. But there's also another story out there that says that the social media platforms are doing everything they can to actively unbalance what is reported on social media platforms, where many people get their news, so that stuff that has a liberal bent to it gets promoted. Stuff that doesn't have a liberal bent to it, has a conservative bent to it, gets demoted. And it's not a level playing field, we're beginning to learn.
Well, it's a huge problem, not just the platforms there, but even the financing. Chase Bank, Patreon, which we call Hatreon, PayPal, have all taken aggressive stances against conservatives. The content platforms, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, etc., have constructed these hate speech policies, which are wildly one-sided. Conservatives had no say in the construction of them. They're set up so that they say, put us in a box where we can't say anything, where you even begin to wonder if the Bible would pass muster. If the Declaration of Independence got flagged by Facebook around a couple months back. That's the kind of thing that happens. And now the UN is talking about trying to set up global hate speech regulation.
Wow. You guys are on the job. What's the most shocking thing that you've seen late that would surprise us about media bias?
Well, the most shocking thing is the reliability of how bad it is. We do this tracker number that shows how the ABC, CBS, and NBC evening news shows handle President Trump. Now, these are shows that are geared to, basically their target audience is older women. That's people who watch evening news shows. 20 to 22 million viewers for those shows, and yet they average somewhere between 90 and 93% negative about President Trump. How do you think the more aggressive left-wing outlets, CNN, Washington Post, the New York Times do, if that's the baseline number?
Right. So if people want to learn more about the Media Research Center, how do they learn more?
Oh, they should go to newsbusters.org. They should read my weekly column on foxnews.com that comes out every Sunday. And they should follow me for full contact Twitter at Dan Gaynor, DANGAINOR.
All right, Dan Gaynor, thank you so much. It is my pleasure to meet you and say hello to all the folks down there at the office.
I will do. Thank you for all that you do.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brian Wilson, and we are reporting live from CPAC 2019. The afternoon session well underway. This is where conservatives come to exchange ideas, listen to the great conservative thought leaders of our area. I am hosting here on behalf of Judicial Watch, and what we're doing here at our little booth here on Broadcast Row is talking to the interesting people who come here. It's fascinating, the people that walk through here that you encounter on a day-to-day basis. If you are a conservative, you probably need to make a trip at some point to CPAC, maybe next year, because this one's going to go one more day and it's over. Joining me now here is Sam Sorbo, author, a homeschool advocate, a talk show host. You're a woman of many talents.
I've been told.
So tell me the things that you're learning, that you're excited about based on your time here at CPAC 2019.
Well, first of all, it's so exciting to be here because it is just a hall filled with youth, and these are young conservatives who understand what's at stake in this nation, understand the great blessing that they've been given to live in this nation, and I think they're up to the task. And that task is defending us from socialism and the indoctrination that's been going on in our schools for so many years.
I'm excited to see the young people here too, but I also am very concerned as an observer of what goes on Capitol Hill when you hear so much excitement being generated around something that I look at and I'm puzzled. The Green New Deal, the socialistic ideas, the incredible move to the left by some elements of the Democrat Party.
Well, they've been trying this for years. This isn't like brand new. The Green New Deal is just sort of the culmination thus far of what's out there. What's great and what really should give you hope is that they actually put it on paper.
Yeah.
Or rather, they put it up online. And then they took it down because it was so disastrous. And they said, oh, that wasn't actually that wasn't the real thing. And then they said, well, yes, it was. We're sorry, but we're not sorry because you really have to watch how many hamburgers you eat, and we're going to tell you how many hamburgers you're allowed to have.
Unless you're the chief of staff for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you can do the lead hamburger, I found out the other day.
Apparently, yes.
So I'm wondering if this has not sort of peaked and now starting to become an object of ridicule. What's your sense of it?
Oh, the Green New Deal?
Yeah.
No, fortunately and unfortunately, I don't think it's peaked. I think they're going to call a vote. And this is the most ludicrous thing. They proposed this Green New Deal. It's supposed to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then McConnell says, okay, let's call a vote. And they go, what? How dare you?
I know.
That's terrible. You think this is a great thing. We should vote on it. No, it's absurd. So the good thing is they've actually sort of stuck their necks out. The question is whether the American public is willing to pass judgment. And the jury's a little bit out. I mean, this group will pass judgment. Seb Gorka said yesterday the Green New Deal's the watermelon deal because it's green on the outside and it's rotten red on the inside. Yeah. And we understand that. But what's great is now they really have to put it to the test, and they're going to have to say what it's going to be like. And that's what she's doing. She's going out and talking about the number of hamburgers that the government will allow you to eat. And so the thing that people don't understand about socialism, sort of generally, because we've been teaching our kids in our government schools for so long that socialism is just grandpa with candy. all evidence to the contrary. It's killed 100 million people in the last 100 years. It has the worst track record of any government.
Form of government, right?
What's great is she's out there and she's actually talking about what the government will control. What they typically talk about is what the government will give you. We will give you health care. It will give you education. It will pay for your education. She's actually saying, well, actually, we're going to control the number of hamburgers you eat. We're going to control your health care. And hopefully the American people will perk up and say, wait, control? That's not what I signed up for. You know what I mean?
Right. You do some talk show work, as I do. Tell me about your show and how people can follow it.
It's the Sam Sorbo Show. It's on mojo50.com. Thank you. And I talk politics and religion. To me, they're the only two things worth talking about. Religion is who you are and where you're going. Politics is how you get there.
And how do you talk about the intersection of those two things in today's society?
So religion is your worldview. It's how you view the world. It's the prism through which you see the world. So if you have a politician who says, I don't allow religion to enter into when I make political decisions or, government decisions, that's a hypocrite, because you can't make decisions without consulting your worldview. If you think that a baby at full term is a baby, then you will make decisions according to that. If you don't, you will make decisions like what we're seeing from the Democrat Party right now. All of these bills that are saying that if a child is born alive, it still has no rights. When? When does it get rights then? Can you explain to me how a baby can be comforted and then a discussion will take place and that's not infanticide?
It's really remarkable that the people who feel the other way try to defend that position.
Yes.
It's shocking.
Well, I just read that all the Democrats that are defending these bills all had donations made by Planned Parenthood to them.
Isn't that interesting? They say governmental money that goes to Planned Parenthood doesn't come back in that form, but it's all fungible, it really isn't.
It's all fungible.
Yeah. So you're also an author and a homeschool advocate. Talk about those things.
So I wrote a book called They're Your Kids, an inspirational journey from self-doubter to homeschool advocate. I was a self-doubter. I didn't think that I could home educate my children. In fact, a year and a half into it, I put them back in school for 6 weeks, and that's what finally convinced me that I was capable. We're taught in school that we're not capable of doing anything that the government schools haven't specifically taught us to do, and that's a lie. And if you look at, you can look at all the success stories of these young men who never graduated college and are hugely successful and innovative. And in fact, I think Steve Jobs gave a speech at, I believe it was Stanford, and said, if you haven't graduated yet, run for your lives.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Because so our education system is broken. We need to fix it. One way is for parents to run for school board, because our school boards are still elected. But if you're not willing to do that, then pull your kids out and home educate and go get my book. They're Your Kids.
Well, it's very good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for dropping by the Judicial Watch TV booth.
I love you guys, and I love what you do, and thank you for standing up for
America. It's a pleasure to meet you. My first encounter with you, but I hope it's not my last.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. We're here at the Judicial Watch booth. This is JWTV. We're being followed by hundreds of thousands of people on social media platforms around the country, and we're very glad to have you along. The numbers are quite impressive. You'd be really surprised how many people are following and how people follow the work of Judicial Watch. And we are doing our very best to bring you interesting people who come here to CPAC 2019 to talk about conservative ideas, the conservative agenda, listen to the thought leaders of the conservative movement. Joining us now is Eric Caron, a U.S. special agent, a U.S. diplomat, and you want to talk about something that you see as the biggest threat to America's national security.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a lot of those, I would imagine,
yes,
right
sir,
now.
there is.
Well, let's start go through the laundry list. By the way, good to meet you.
Thank you, sir. Good to meet you. Well, listen, this president understands border security is national security, period. And without it, we'll end up like Venezuela. He understands that. He sees the threat matrix every day. And the threat matrix includes not only terrorism, but it includes state sponsors such as Iran and Syria, North Korea, Sudan, and other countries are concerned. And he also sees that we're in the middle of not in the middle, but we're still in the war, drug war, and that most people have fallen asleep on. And he sees the cartels threatening us with all their drugs flowing through the southwest border, and he wants to stop that because he understands and he sees that Mexico has 40,000 body bags, Brian, 40,000, and that bleeds over into the U.S.
You say the wall is important.
It is.
Right now we're having a debate. The president has said it's so important there needs to be a declaration of a national emergency.
Amen.
And it looks like Congress is going to try to take away that national emergency declaration. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. I think ultimately the president wins in this, but it's surprising to me that there's a debate at all.
I agree. If we're serious about, quote unquote, a war on terror and a war on drugs, then let's take the gloves off and let's start providing the men and women of law enforcement and our intelligence community with the tools necessary. Because right now they need more tools. They need more assets. And this president wants to give them the help they need. And part of it is physical barriers and walls along our southern border where they're required.
What about the people who say, "Oh, a wall doesn't really stop anything"?
Do you have a door on your home?
Yes.
You have a door and you lock that door because you want to keep people from entering your home. That wall helps people enter our country legally. Correct?
Right, that's the goal.
And that's the goal.
All right. You say that there is collusion, but not in the way that Washington's been talking about collusion of late.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, as a special agent, I had the opportunity to work domestically as well as internationally. And in 2006 and 7, I was the case agent and became the manager of one of the largest mass arrests in U.S. history. And it was at a U.S. defense contractor in New Bedford, Massachusetts, my hometown. We inserted an undercover special agent, posing as an illegal alien.
Right.
The owner hired her knowingly. We hit the place after about 6 months. We arrested 361 illegal aliens. Great case. Wicked good, as we say in Massachusetts.
Yes, you do say that, actually.
Wicked good case, wicked good investigation. Well, the Massachusetts Immigration Advocacy Group basically came out with I have a document on my website. It's called Switched On Life. The Carnegie Corporation did a case study, and they basically were very proud to show us their roadmap and how they colluded, how the Massachusetts Immigration Advocacy Group colluded with the media and Governor Deval Patrick at the time, Senator Kennedy, and Kerry. And it's all black and white, 15-page document. I highly recommend anybody who's interested to go to the website and read it.
Well, Eric, Karen, it's good to have you here. Thanks for dropping by our little booth here at Judicial Watch. Good to see you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Hi, Brian Wilson, providing coverage of CPAC 2019. And as we continue to find all the things that are going on here, and people are dropping by, and we are talking not only about the things that happen here inside the hall where they're talking about conservative ideas and a conservative agenda, but we are also talking about the things that occur here at Judicial Watch and the importance of what they do. And so we are here to have that conversation. Remind me again, your first name. I know Bruce Schlesman. We talked yesterday, and there have been 1,000 people through here. Bruce, I'm so sorry that I could not recall that. Talk a little bit about what you do for Judicial Watch and the importance of getting the message out about this very important organization.
So I run our email program and do social media for us right now. The importance of getting the message out right now is it's so critical because, our lawyers do good work every day. They're in the courts battling to get documents. They're in the courts battling to get the truth from the government exposed. And the importance is someone needs to tell people about it. Otherwise, all that works for nothing. So that truth needs to be getting out. And so what we do is we get that out. And stuff like this broadcast, coverage is incredibly important because it lets people know about the work that Judicial Watch is doing and every day.
And so far, I mean, it's a tremendous social media platform that you have, and a tremendous following you have. I mean, I'm shocked. I'm hearing hundreds of thousands of people were watching what we were doing here yesterday.
Yeah,
astonishing. It really is big.
It's incredible.
And so it takes a while to develop that kind of platform and that kind of following. How do you go about that?
Well, I think one of the big things is it develops itself in some way because, you know, we're often the only game in town with a lot of the FOIA requests and documents that we get. We get it before anyone else. We put it out there before anyone else, and people come to us because in many ways, we're the only people doing what we're doing on such a massive scale. You know, we're the #1 FOIA litigator, and I think people take notice of that, and more people come, and then we have a dedicated team of people that is constantly working to expand that platform.
And you have been here, I know, for the last few days at CPAC. And not only are you here on behalf of Judicial Watch, but you've been participating in some of the activities, meeting people. A lot of young people like you are here.
Yes, absolutely. You know, this event is very student friendly, and in many ways, I think sometimes the students outnumber everyone else, honestly. Right, yeah. So, yeah, a lot of young people.
And that's, I think, exciting because a lot of people look at what's going on in Washington right now with the move towards socialism and very progressive ideas and think that's all being driven by young people. But there are an equal number, I think, of young people who look at the world from a conservative standpoint. That might be surprising to a lot of people.
Absolutely. There's a large chunk of young people that are in the conservative movement, that the conservative movement is growing. In many ways, it's getting younger. And, you know, this is a good thing for the health of conservative politics today and just general constitutional revivalism. You know, there's a lot of people that take the Constitution seriously that are my age and, you know, are kind of returning to that kind of viewpoint, which is incredible.
You must then be excited to be associated with an organization like Judicial Watch. What does that mean to you? And what pride do you derive from actually getting information that other people don't seem to be able to get at?
You know, it's an incredible feeling to work for such a great organization and be able to know that we're getting the truth each and every day, and that every day you're going to work and you're doing something that makes a difference. You know, that's a great feeling, and you know, not a lot of people get that. So, you know, it is such a great organization what we do. Just even like who we've talked to today, the information we've just gotten today alone. This is one day. You know, we do. The amount of evidence that we get and gather and the amount of truth that we expose each and every day is incredible.
Go through all the ways that people can follow what you do at Judicial Watch.
Of course. So you can check us out on YouTube. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. If you support our work and you want to do something to help support us, go to our website and donate, or just go to our website, check us out. We have tons of content that's posted there each and every day. Subscribe to our email list and you can get our newsletter, and that's my primary responsibility is getting that out to our membership. So you can subscribe there to get the truth delivered right to your email each and every day.
Bruce, thank you so much. It's good to meet your acquaintance, and thank you much for joining us.
Of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so glad we had this time together, just to have a laugh or two. That wraps up our Judicial Watch coverage here from the National Harbor, just across the river from Washington, D.C. I want to say a personal thank you to the folks at Judicial Watch for allowing me to be a part of this broadcast. And if you're in the Middle Tennessee area, I hope you'll listen to me at WTN. That's Super Talk 99.7 WTN, the powerhouse talk station of that region. And if you do follow me, I'd love that on Twitter as well. It's at Brian Wilson 997. Hope you'll do that. Again, thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for finding interest in what we do here at Judicial Watch. We greatly appreciate you being with us here over the past 2 days. Have a great day.